Axiom Verge, originally released 2.5 years ago for the PlayStation 4 and many other platforms since, is finally making its way to the Nintendo Switch after a vocal outcry from fans made clear the obvious demand for such a port. Much like Cave Story before it, Axiom Verge stands as testament to the creative power of a single individual. In this case, that individual is Thomas Happ, who essentially made Axiom Verge by himself as the game's sole programmer, musician, and artist. You'd be forgiven for being skeptical of a game that began as a side project that took one person 5 years to complete in their spare time, but toss any lingering skepticism aside. Axiom Verge is the real deal, an excellent Metroidvania that stands proudly among the genre's best. In Axiom Verge, you play as Trace, a scientist who is knocked unconscious following a lab accident involving a frozen pressure valve. Inexplicably, he awakens in a hostile alien world where exotic creatures and mutant-like monstrosities are all out to kill him. To say too much more than this would risk spoiling Axiom Verge's engaging sci-fi romp of a narrative, but long story short, it's up to Trace to find out where he is, what's going on, and how, or if, he can get back home to Earth. As interesting as it is, Axiom Verge's story can feel unnecessarily obtuse at times, with important background information relegated to hidden files and notes that are entirely possible to miss if you're not exploring your surroundings thoroughly. Still, the game does a pretty good job of guiding you toward the most crucial of these documents, and even without them, the narrative remains an engaging, driving force throughout, and if you really get into it, certain details will haunt you long after the credits roll. But it's the gameplay that takes center stage in Axiom Verge. Like any great Metroidvania, Axiom Verge pulls you into its haunting alien world and firmly keeps you there by empowering you with a constant flow of new abilities, moves, and weapons, turning what were once boundaries into jumping-off points for deeper exploration. Meanwhile, the precise controls and pixel-perfect platforming physics, which call to mind the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS-era Castlevania titles in particular, only serve to keep you glued firmly to your seat as you plumb the depths of Axiom Verge's exotic alien landscapes. But perhaps the best aspect of Axiom Verge's take on the Metroidvania genre is how it subverts the expectations of genre veterans at nearly every turn. If you've played enough Metroidvanias, to some degree you kind of know what to expect from the usual ability drip. At some point you'll get a better jump or a double jump, later on you'll probably get some sort of grappling mechanism to cross large chasms, and by the end you'll have some doodad that lets you fly freely to the furthest ends of the game world. Axiom Verge knows this, and it uses that knowledge to defy those expectations constantly. For example, even though you'll still get a higher jump and a grappling hook somewhere along the way, you never get a double jump, and instead you explore areas out of Trace's reach by firing miniature drones and later gaining the ability to warp to said drones. These and other changes from the genre norm can be jarring at first, but utilizing them becomes second nature in a matter of minutes, and they absolutely lend Axiom Verge a wholly unique flavor even among other Metroidvania games. There's also a tool that allows you to literally glitch the game world and even enemies in your favor, creating purposeful gameplay mechanics out of the visual weirdness that often occurred naturally in NES games like the original Metroid. I don't want to say too much more here because so much of Axiom Verge's appeal lies in the joy of discovery, but suffice to say, Metroidvania fans looking for something new and surprising will find it in Axiom Verge. That's not to say Axiom Verge's gameplay is without problems. While some backtracking is a welcome part of any Metroidvania game, Axiom Verge's total lack of any warp or fast travel system means trekking across the game's rather large world can become rather tiresome later in the game and feels like needless padding. There is something of a central hub that allows somewhat direct access to each area, but this doesn't go far enough to alleviate the backtracking problem and feels more like a band-aid than a genuine solution. And while Axiom Verge's map is easy to read and navigate, it overlooks the crucial 2D Metroid tradition of marking areas of interest with little dots to give players some idea as to the location of hidden power-ups and collectibles. This means memory is your only ally when trying to keep track of the myriad suspicious areas you'll come across on your travels, which feels unnecessarily limiting. While the game does allow you to place 2 map markers per area as reminders of where to return to later, 2 per area isn't nearly enough for all the secrets hiding in Axiom Verge's world, and the path to 100% completion becomes unnecessarily inconvenient and long-winded as a result. On that note, you may find yourself occasionally lost even if you aren't going for 100% completion. Axiom Verge basically drops you into its world and tells you to figure it out from there, and while we have seen that approach work in games like Breath of the Wild, even Zelda included basic waypoints that you could follow or ignore at your leisure. Axiom Verge has no such waypoints, and even though I was never lost for more than 30 minutes or so at any given time, an optional hint system pointing you in the right direction could have helped alleviate the aimless wandering that can sometimes occur. I also encountered a couple of issues specific to the Nintendo Switch version as I played. For one, the game seems to have problems intelligently switching control over to the Joy-Cons when changing from TV mode to handheld mode, meaning you have to do a controller resync if you want to keep playing immediately after removing the Switch from the dock. It's a minor issue, but an issue nonetheless. More troubling are the 2 random crashes I experienced while playing, one of them during the end credits. Fortunately, neither crash resulted in me losing any data or even any progress, but I was lucky enough to have saved just prior to my first crash. Others might not be so lucky. But the crash during the end credits meant I missed a post-credits story scene, so hopefully these issues get patched out at or shortly after launch in order to minimize their impact on Switch players. But my short list of grievances ends there, and other than the Switch-specific crashes, they're pretty small potatoes compared to everything else Axiom Verge gets so enormously right. The game feels particularly at home on the Switch, too. Everything really pops on the Switch's gorgeous screen, and the Switch Pro Controller feels like a natural fit for the game when you're playing in TV mode, though the Joy-Cons also hold up surprisingly well for a 2D game. The lack of any HD rumble is a slight disappointment, however. Axiom Verge's graphic and sound design are first-rate, which is especially impressive when you recall that the same lone programmer is responsible for it all. There are some particularly cool special effects on display related to the way you can intentionally glitch the game world, especially for a title rooted in 8-bit aesthetics. More importantly, the exotic, often unsettling landscapes and backgrounds truly look and feel alien, as do the game's many eldritch creatures, especially the bosses, almost all of which are a blast to fight. Meanwhile, those same creatures emit exceptionally shrill sounds that gave me goosebumps and made my skin crawl on more than one occasion, even as I reminded myself that it shouldn't be possible for 8-bit creatures to be so unsettling. Add to that a memorably atmospheric soundtrack that thickly layers dark, thumping techno on top of an NES-like chiptune bass, and suddenly you have an audiovisual experience that both recreates and even improves on the intense atmosphere and sense of isolation that have endeared so many to the Metroid series. And that's really the whole point. Even if some minor execution problems hold it back from all-time greatness, I like Axiom Verge a lot. It's one of the best Metroidvania experiences out there, and in many ways it stands toe-to-toe with the classics that inspired its creation. But it's the way Axiom Verge subverts and defies well-worn genre expectations that make it particularly brilliant, and for that reason alone, I can't wait to see what Lone Wolf developer Thomas Happ creates next. Hey, thank you so much for watching, and as always, if you enjoyed this review, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and follow us on social media. You can find all the links you need in the video description below. Otherwise, keep it on GameXplain for more on Axiom Verge, the Nintendo Switch, and all things gaming.